All right. Welcome all to the City Club of Eugene's March 1st, 2024 program. Like March, we are coming in like a lion this week, tackling campaign financing in Oregon, the dangers of dark money. My name's Andrew Calick, and I am City Club's president. We're coming to you from our home at the 5th Street Market in the heart of downtown Eugene. It's my pleasure to extend a warm welcome to our speakers and to all of you joining us in person, online, and over the radio. For 3 decades, the City Club of Eugene has remained dedicated to its founding mission, to build community vision through open inquiry. In accordance with our mission and purpose, we hope to connect people throughout our community and across generations, identities, experiences, and perspectives. You are invited this week and every week to join us in this effort, to share your wisdom, learn something new, and take active steps to make a difference in this city and region we all love. Of course, we cannot do this work alone, so a special thank you to our Platinum, Community, and Diamond sponsors. The Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce, serving as a catalytic leader in creating a vibrant and diverse economy that drives economic opportunity and well-being. Kaiser Permanente, which exists to provide high-quality, affordable healthcare services and to improve the health of our members and the communities we serve. More information at www.kp.org. The University of Oregon has helped Oregonians question critically, think logically, reason effectively, communicate clearly, act creatively, and live ethically since 1876. More information at uoregon.edu. Peace Health has been proud to serve Eugene, Lane County, and beyond as your hometown healthcare partner for more than 80 years. The Peace Health mission is to keep you and your family healthy. Learn more at peacehealth.org. Lane Community College transforms lives through learning. LCC provides comprehensive, accessible, high-quality educational opportunities that promote student success. For more information, visit lanecc.edu. The AARP of Oregon is a trusted and positive force for social change, using the experience and leadership of volunteer members to benefit all Oregonians as we age. More information at states.aarp.org/Oregon. And thank you to the City of Eugene and to Lane County for their support as well. Whether you're joining us for the first time or you're a longtime listener, I invite you to support our work by becoming an individual member, a business or community sponsor, or volunteering to be part of a committee or our board. You can do all those things and more at cityclubofueugene.org. Your support and engagement make these community conversations possible, and we need you, so thanks for your support. With that, I'll turn the mic over to Fabio Andrade, co-coordinator of today's program. Fabio.
Thanks, Andrew. Today we welcome Dan Meek, a public interest lawyer based in Portland. Dan is also involved with Honest Elections Oregon. And Rick Metzger, former Oregon Senator and current director of PacWest Lobby Group, to discuss the dangers of dark money in political campaigns. Oregon stands out as one of the few states without any restrictions on political donations, with large sums being funneled through organizations that don't disclose their donors. They are commonly referred to as dark money. This opaque funding can sway public opinion and votes, while concealing the true backers of a campaign, posing a threat to our democratic process. In the entire history of the Oregon legislature, no bills aimed at imposing limits on campaign contributions have succeeded. Our guest speakers will discuss the significance of transparency in campaign financing and why little progress has been made. Welcome to City Club, Dan Meek with Honest Elections Oregon, and Rick Metzger with PacWest Lobby Group. Thank you.
I'm assuming you want me to start now?
Yes.
Assuming I'm on, I would like to do just a brief review of the campaign finance situation in Oregon, and then go on to what's happening with the current initiative campaign for what's called Petition 9 for 2024, and also what's going on at the Oregon legislature right now, which in my view is extremely alarming. Oregon's one of the only 5 states that doesn't limit campaign contributions. The amount spent by candidates in Oregon has skyrocketed by a factor of 13 since 1996. Just for example, and if I can share my screen here, I will show you an example. And there it is. This is just an example of the trajectory of spending, in Oregon campaigns. These are the campaigns for governor. Total spending for all candidates running for governor in Oregon has gone from about $2 million in 1998 to $82 million in the year 2022. It's basically been doubling every 2 years. The pattern is the same for the Oregon legislature. In the last election, the top 10 spending candidates for the Oregon Senate raised and spent an average of over $1.5 million each. And the top 10 House candidates spent nearly $900,000 each. The grand total was about $45 million for all candidates. The Oregonian reported a few years ago that Oregon races for the legislature were the most expensive per capita in America, except for New Jersey. On the disclosure side, unlike Washington, California, Colorado, and 8 other states, Oregon law does not require that political advertisements identify the donors to the campaign. And it doesn't require that the actual sources of funds be identified, even in reports to the government, which we call ORSTAR. The only thing that's required to report is just the last person or entity who touched the money before it was given to the candidate or political committee or independent expenditure campaign. As a result, it's extremely easy in Oregon to hide the real sources of funds. All you need to do is run it through a nice-sounding political committee or a nice-sounding nonprofit corporation that you created, and the only thing that needs to be disclosed is that nice-sounding name. The Center for Public Integrity and Public Radio International ranks Oregon's campaign finance system as the worst in America, except for Mississippi. So I guess that's something. The Oregon legislature, as Fabio mentioned, has never enacted campaign contribution limits and has never required that actual sources of campaign funds be disclosed or displayed in advertisements, which we call taglines. Oregon voters have enacted contribution limits 3 times. The first time was 1906. The legislature has then raised those limits once and repealed them twice. So it certainly appears that real reform has to be done by the people using the initiative power, because it's not done by the legislature. And so we've been doing that. Honest Elections Oregon presented true campaign finance reform measures to the voters of Multnomah County in 2016, and we won with 89% of the yes vote. That measure, the charter amendment, limits contributions to candidates for Multnomah County office to $500 and requires that all ads identify their top 5 donors with 2 layers of drilling down to the original sources. And without drill down, the only donors identified would be the nice-sounding names of political committees or nonprofit organizations. We did the same thing in Portland in 2018. We won with 87% of the vote. And we also, at that time, reversed the longstanding opposition to campaign finance reform at the Oregonian editorial board. On the state level, the political establishment has vigorously fought campaign finance reform initiatives with a series of lawsuits, what I consider to be wrong procedural decisions by the Secretary of State, and massive hassles against signature gathering. We finally got approval to gather signatures on Petition 9, which we also call IP9 for Initiative Petition 9, after 9 months of delay imposed by the ballot title process, including 7 months of delay at the Oregon Supreme Court, to decide a lawsuit brought against the measure by the political arm of the public employee unions. But we now have 100,000 signatures on IP9 out of the 160,000 that we need by July 5th. You can see the text of IP9 and summaries of its content at the website honest-elections.com, or just Google Honest Elections Oregon or just Honest Elections, and we are the top Google result. Click on Petition 9, the Petition 9 tab at the top of the page, and you'll get all that information. Now, what's going on at the legislature? On February 23rd, the House Rules Committee first posted a new, what I call fake campaign finance reform bill, HB 4024, directly written by the lobbyists for the largest corporations and unions in Oregon. The committee then called a public hearing for 1 day later. The lobbyists, of course, for the corporations and unions testified in favor, as did the top Democratic and Republican leaders in the House. They both came off the Rules Committee and testified in favor of it. But all of Oregon's good government groups testified against the bill, including the League of Women Voters of Oregon, Common Cause, Honest Elections Oregon, the Consolidated Oregon Indivisible Network, and many others. We think the purpose of HB 4024 is to derail our initiative which is supported by the good government groups and drafted over a period of 20 years with assistance from state and national experts. Unlike Petition 9, the bill at the legislature has huge loopholes that would allow well-funded persons and groups to easily evade its supposed rules. To see the loopholes we've identified, you can, again, go to that website, Honest Elections Oregon, and click on the HB 4024 link in the upper menu. I'd like to mention just a few of the many loopholes in that, and I've put them on the slide as well. First, candidate advertisements and ballot measure advertisements don't need to identify any of their sources of funds. It's even a step backwards because it restricts the existing limited disclaimer requirements on independent expenditure ads regarding candidates. It says you don't have to do anything in those ads, identify anything, unless the individual ad costs $10,000 or more. So just break up the ad bill into pieces of less than $10,000 and all existing disclaimer requirements are effectively repealed. 2, foreign corporations or entities can provide unlimited funds for or against candidates or measures. IP9 does not have any of these problems. 3, and this is a big one, any 2 people or entities can create and fund an unlimited number of membership organizations, each of which can receive unlimited funds from unlimited sources, and given the election year, $66,000 cash to each statewide candidate, $33,000 cash to each other candidate, $50,000 each to an unlimited number of multi-candidate committees, which are PACs that support or oppose multiple candidates. And let me go to the next. And next, the same membership organizations can also give per year to each statewide candidate 3 years worth of full-time services, which can include professional services, easily worth over $400,000. They can do that twice in the election year, and also give per year to each other candidate 1 year of such services, easily worth $100,000 or more, and do that twice during the election year. Next, any entity can form a small donor committee, which can contribute basically depending on the number of members of the committee. The number of donors to the committee. If the committee has, for example, 10,000 donors, which is certainly realistic for small donor committees created by the unions, that committee can contribute $264,000 to each statewide candidate, and also $132,000 to any other candidate. And $132,000 to any number of multi-candidate committees, which in turn can contribute to candidates. The additional few loopholes is there's a loophole for in-kind services that anyone can make, and that includes any individual, corporation, union, association, or any club or any kind of an entity. Basically, unlimited legal services, $10,000 of food and transportation, plus office space. Next, major party candidates may receive double the contributions allowed for minor party candidates and those who get on the ballot basically as independents by collecting voter signatures. Candidates can carry over funds from one election to the next, giving incumbents a huge advantage over newcomer candidates who don't have war chests. It, strangely enough, nullifies the City of Portland's program for providing public funding to qualifying candidates. I don't think they say they're going to change that, but the only version of the bill that exists in the Oregon legislature system doesn't change it. And finally, they change all of the deadlines for anything taking effect until 2027. The initiative petition 9 would take effect in 2025. So they put everything off for an additional 2 years. Now, this is being put forward by a combination of the public employee union lobbyists and the corporation lobbyists through their big lobby organization, Oregon Business and Industry. They say they're going to have the House Rules Committee do a work session on Monday and pass it on Monday, send it to the floor of the House, and that the floor of the House will pass it on Monday. So this is a bill that's received exactly one public hearing, and that public hearing took place with having the text of the bill only available for 1 day. So I guess probably Rick Metzger is used to this sort of thing when he was at the legislature, and I would just say that Rick Metzger was absolutely at the top of the list of outstanding Oregon senators when he was in the Senate. and I am eager to answer your questions.
All right. I guess that means I'm next up, right? You know, doing this dog and pony show from Portland to here, and I'm the most untecho guy in the world, so I'm glad that Dan can do all that because I would be unable to do that. It's great to be back here. I was here about a year and a half ago, prior to the 2022 election, talking about that. And it was really interesting to see how that all unfolded, pretty much as we kind of talked about that day. And as Dan has mentioned, and you saw by the graph, how expensive that election turned out to be for the gubernatorial election. One thing that is really certain, and is that, and Dan talked about this, is the fact that the reason we don't have true campaign finance reform is that what I call the campaign industrial complex likes it just the way it is. And if you are supporting, say, a major political philosophy, you don't want those on the other side to have an advantage over you. You do like to believe you can get an advantage over them, but you definitely have a détente in terms of no one's going to give, another political side, particularly, political party, Republican and Democrat would be the most common, but you can certainly have this in other philosophies that you see materialized through ballot measures, that people try to do different types of things in that regard. We did have campaign finance reform in 1996 after passage in 1994. It lasted 1 year before the Oregon Supreme Court struck it down as unconstitutional to limit contributions. So we really didn't have a really good chance to see how that might work. Certainly on state representative senator races, the spending was significantly reduced that particular election. But before we had a chance to really see how that might go long term, the Oregon Supreme Court overturned that. And as Dan pointed out, which he was a major factor in putting out a ballot measure that actually changed the Constitution to allow campaign limitation to finally take place in Oregon. And that's been in effect now for a few years, but as you know, and as Dan has pointed out, that hasn't happened. There has never been a lot of inertia in the legislature to do this because there's always this feeling I'm going to give someone else an advantage. And so what we have today, frankly, and I do want to give credit to the legislators. Legislators are working really hard trying to do the right thing on this issue, but they, as you might understand, are also torn by the fact that they don't want to put anything in there that they think gives someone else an advantage. And so at the end of the day, and I think Dan articulated this pretty well, I think it's fair to say that the proposal in the legislature really doesn't do anything but make campaign finance more complicated. But at the end of the day, I think it would be very difficult to say you would see any difference in terms of the ultimate spending on particular races that are critical to the state. I'm thinking a governor's race, a controversial ballot measure, or perhaps a state senate or state representative race in which the balance of power in the legislature would be at stake. In those races, I can't see that you would see any decrease at all. I think you would continue to see the escalation of spending because of what was at stake and the opportunities, whether it's through independent expenditures or through the new system, as Dan explained. For example, and Dan mentioned this, under this proposal in the small donor committee, they say you like to limit it like the federal elections to $3,300 that you could give to, say, Representative Fahey here in Eugene or Representative Holvey. But that's, as Dan pointed out, is per 2,500 donors. Well, if you're SEIU, you have 55,000 donors. So every 2,500, you get to give another 3,300, and that's how you get, it all adds up. It's 22 times that amount of money at the end of the day. And the fact that you could set up individual committees, everyone in this room, if you were so inclined, could set up a political committee. And you may not be able to give that money directly to a representative senator beyond a certain limitation, but if you're of the same will of mind, you can buy your own ads on KVAL and support your candidate or oppose this position. So when you look at the total amount of spending on those critical races, it won't particularly happen. Now, why do we have this in the legislature now in this short session? Which, by the way, was created when I was in the legislature under Senate President Peter Courtney for a few weeks to kind of balance the budget. Well, we have more major issues in this 3.5-week session than we have had in the last 2 long 6-month sessions. I mean, it's remarkable. And as Dan pointed out, I appreciate the effort and the interest of the legislatures on important issues. The problem is in this short session is, like he said, you put out a bill one afternoon and the next day you're having a hearing before people even know it's out there. And that's the only hearing. And you get 2 minutes to testify. You don't have a chance to analyze and do a lot of things. And so that's what happens. You mentioned the campaign finance fund. Of course, we have Governor Kotek's housing bill, which is very, very important. You've got the Measure 110. You've got campaign finance. You've got a major expansion of PERS. You have changing daylight and standard time. I mean, you name it. A lot of things are rushing through without a lot of public process. And this was a session that, when we all passed it, was designed for the purpose of doing mid-biennial budget adjustments and then really critical things that came up. But this is major legislation, and there's just not the opportunity for a lot of public process when you do that. But why do we have this measure here, the campaign finance? Why all of a sudden has the political industrial complex got religion? Well, it is because of Dan Nine and his group. Because, as he mentioned, people vote for campaign finance, have always voted for campaign finance. He talked about 80 percentile numbers. And with 100,000 signatures, there was a calculation that this measure is going to make it to the ballot. If this measure is on the ballot, it's going to pass, and that will significantly limit some of the expenditures that we talked about. And that was the catalyst, no question about it, for the two sides to get together and let's put something together and say we solved the problem. And I think that's what we're seeing in the legislature now. Again, good-hearted people with the right intentions, but at the end of the day, I think the only one that would benefit from the version of campaign finance that is in the legislature is going to be the people who run C&E Systems. C&E Systems is an organization based out of Portland that almost every campaign uses to do their contribution and expenditure reporting because of all the deadlines. You have, 7-day deadlines, 2-day deadlines, you can get fined and all that. So they're professionals and they do all that for you for a fee, based on the number of transactions you have. Well, with all the different committees and all the different routes and escape routes from this limitation that this particular campaign finance bill will create, there's going to be a lot more committees, so that they could aggregate money and pass it along, and that'll be great business for C&E Systems. I mean, they're going to double their workforce, and if it was a public company, I'd be buying stock in that right now, because that's going to be the biggest change. And so while it's more complicated, I think the bill is like 46 pages long, it does create so many off-ramps that at the end of the day, as a citizen, I don't think you would see significant change to contribution limits. And you do see some negative things. For example, the transparency issues actually are watered down, as Dan pointed out in that one. Now, before I conclude and go to your questions, is in terms of the one that Mr. Meek and others are pushing, I don't want to be a Pollyanna, though, and say that you're not going to see a lot of money even if that passes. It's by far better. But because of the United States Supreme Court decision in Citizens United, where anybody is allowed to expend as much as they want, those individuals with the means, if they want to buy their own television ads to support whoever, can continue to do that. So we're not going to be able to clamp on everything. But I think IP9 is far superior over a wide swath of elections that we'll have in the state of Oregon would definitely be a major improvement to what we have now. But what is most important is anything in the electoral process, it's the citizens to stand up. What will happen, and I have no doubt about this, I don't think Dan and his folks are going to have a lot of big money to push their initiative. Now, by itself on the ballot, it wouldn't need to, because people, like I say, they support these things. But if, in fact, the legislative measure is turned into a referral to the voters to compete with IP9, all that money on both sides, right, the Republican side, Democratic side, the union side, the business side, you're going to see, and this is almost kind of like ironic, a huge amount of campaign money to push that measure of campaign finance reform of big money in order to try and defeat IP9, because how it works, if you have two competing measures, then the one that gets the most votes wins. And if IP9 doesn't have the money, the public interest money to support their message, we're going to see a lot of ads about how great the legislative one is, how bad this other one is, in trying to see that one prevails. So it is, I say, it's ironic that in trying to decide how to limit campaign spending, the escalation of campaign spending, that we'll see, if this happens, and it looks like it is, a lot of campaign spending to convince you that you should do this version of campaign spending. So I think with that, Sandra, I think we'll take our break, and in 5 minutes, we'll come back and answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. We'll begin our question and answer in just a few moments, but first I'd like to thank the business and in-kind sponsors whose support helps to make City Club possible. Thank you to our gold sponsors, Network Charter School, Hirschner Hunter, LLC, Evans, Elder, Brown & Subert, and Hudson Dental. Thank you also to our in-kind sponsors, KRVM 91.9 Radio, Alpha IT, Dotson's Photography, and Kid Sports. Also a special thank you to our award-winning public radio station, KLCC FM 89.7, for airing City Club programs Mondays at 7 p.m. For those listening at home or in the car right now, your household is one of several thousand tuning into City Club on KLCC, and we love that you are here. You can also find all recent City Club programs archived on KLCC, as well as on our YouTube channel and as podcasts. We'll take a brief break, and then we'll be back with question and answer. Thank you. Club of Eugene's Forum on Campaign Finance in Oregon. I'm now going to turn it over to Sandra Bishop, the co-coordinator of today's program, to moderate our question and answer session. Sandra.
Thank you, Andrew. Sandra Bishop, I'm not sure where the cameras are. I'm not sure it matters. It's very exciting today to be talking about this topic right now. I'm Sandra Bishop, longtime City Club member. The legislature is in the process of trying to counteract or water down a ballot measure. It's quite common, happens in other subjects, but this has a high price tag on it. So I'm going to open it up for the first questioner.
Hi, question for either or both of you, and thank you both. Yeah, I will. Kurt Yider, City Club member for the last year or so. I'll play devil's advocate a bit. Seems in the last 5 years or so, there's been an effort to have new people get into politics, to dilute the status quo, if you will. It seems to me that a new politician, someone trying to break into politics, would need more campaign funds to get their name across, get their ideas across, to become known, to compete with people already in the legislatures. Would the campaign finance that's proposed thwart that effort?
Okay, I'll start that and I'll turn over to Dan then. Well, you make a good point. Anytime that you're entering the political arena against an incumbent, unless there is an overwhelming public sentiment that has arisen against that incumbent, it's very, very tough. And so, yes, I would say that those resources would probably need to be more for someone like that than someone who was already established. Well, for two reasons. Number one, they're already established, everybody knows their name, and if they're generally well-liked and accepted in that community, it's going to be very, very difficult. And then secondly, to what Dan pointed out, they are likely to already have resources that they have built up over time, so you're kind of starting out from a negative position, right? So yes, I would say that would be more difficult, and it's more difficult now. I mean, even if someone wanted to support you just because of that. Dan?
Yes. Under the current system of no limits, of course, incumbents raise far more than challengers in very large donations. It's quite rare for a large donation to go to a challenger. One version of our initiative that we drafted some years ago would have allowed challengers to have double the contribution limits of incumbents. But the United States Supreme Court issued decisions indicating that that sort of differential treatment between candidates for the same office would be struck down. So we don't have that in Petition 9. What we do have is that we require candidates basically to close out their campaign accounts after the election so they can't amass war chests to use in the next election against the newcomer. Now, the Oregon Or-Star system is very strange in that it ties each account to the name of the candidate, him or herself. That is, if there's a Friends of Rick Metzger committee, that means that's the committee Rick has to use to raise funds if he's running for Senate or for the House or for governor or for anything. It just keeps, it basically has perpetual life. In other states, the campaign committees have to be closed out at the end of the election, and if you want to run for some other office or even run for the same office again, you have to start a new campaign committee, you have to start from zero. And that definitely benefits challengers. So I think our system is much better for challengers than the current system, and much better than the bill at the legislature, which basically would allow pretty close to unlimited contributions anyway.
Thank you.
My name's Roz Stein. I'm a City Club member. And this is not about the finance thing, but it just occurred to me when you talked about what you have to do in the short session. Is it possible to not have the short session but have regular sessions, or is that cost too high? I mean, I moved here from California. We didn't have a short session.
Yeah.
Okay, but I'm just wondering. It seems like you're overworked.
Yeah. Well, Actually, in California, you can have perpetual sessions because
Yes,
it's a professional legislature in California. And one thing I do remind people is that legislators, they make a few more dollars than when I was here, but it's still not much. It's like $29,000 a year or something like that, plus per diem. Whereas California is a professional legislature. Yes, it is, Roz. It's difficult, and again, you don't want to take any particular measure and say, well, they shouldn't be doing this, because like the housing thing is very important, the homelessness, talk about Measure 110. But again, when we never had this before until about 14 years ago, 12 years ago, something like that. And it was because of, we do a biennial budget, we're a citizen legislature, people go home to their regular jobs, and then a lot of things change, and they kind of wish they could balance the budget or take care of a few minor important things, but in a minor amount of time to do that. But anytime you get a bunch of legislators together and they have a bill, you kind of lose control. And so I think that this is in their Constitution. It was put in the Constitution. So these number of days are limited to that amount. And so everybody's in a rush very, very quickly to do what they can.
I second all of that, except I think under the Constitution now the 35 days can be extended.
It can be.
By the legislature. I'm not sure if it takes a 2/3 vote or something, but it's possible to extend the session, but that has never happened.
Thank you. We've had a couple questions come in since we've started the meeting. One of them is, would the provisions in the bill in the legislature or the ballot measure on both accounts, would these limitations apply to a recall election?
That's Dan. Dan, you're the expert there.
Right. Recalls actually involve two separate elections. The first election is a recall. It's basically a ballot measure election. You collect signatures and then you put on the ballot a proposition or measure that says we want to recall, Rick Metzger from the Senate. So that's a ballot measure election, and the U.S. Supreme Court, in many cases, beginning in 1978, by big majorities, has said you can't limit contributions in ballot measure elections. So neither one of the bills addresses that. Once a recall measure succeeds, that means that then you have a real candidate election. And typically the recalled candidate runs or not runs, depending on what she decides to do, and other people run as well. That's a candidate election, and that would be subject to the limits in Initiative Petition 9. It's not clear whether it's subject to the limits in the bill at the legislature.
Thank you, Dan. Go ahead, Andrew.
Andrew Kallick, just stepping back a minute, I wondered if each of you could say what you think the problem is that you're trying to solve. Because I am curious whether it's purely about the quantity of money, if it's about the disclosure, if it's about that certain people have access that others don't. So what is the problem? And then aligned with that, what have some solutions been that other states have used to address this in a meaningful way? Thanks.
Go ahead, Dan.
Well, to me, it's the purpose is to reduce the overwhelming influence of big money at the legislature. In a previous life, what I did is sue utilities for cheating ratepayers, and Rick Metzger helped me do that back several years ago. And I would, for example, in 1998, I won a big case at the Oregon Court of Appeals that would have required Portland General Electric, then owned by Enron, to make a big refund to ratepayers in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So Enron just went across the street to the Oregon legislature and got a bill passed that repealed the ballot measure that my lawsuit was based on, the 1978 ballot measure. So it occurred to me then, you really can't accomplish anything as far as anything, consumer protection, environmental protection, et cetera, if the big money folks can just basically get the legislature to do whatever they want. So that's why I'm in it. I switched to campaign finance reform back in about 1999 because it was clear to me that other issues are futile to pursue without it. As far as other states, 45 other states have limits of one sort or another on contributions. I would say among the best states are Washington, Colorado, and Montana. And the Center for Public Integrity and others do various rankings of states on the quality of their campaign finance regulation systems in order to avoid corruption and promote the public interest. The last standings were that Washington was #1. So yeah, other states do this a lot differently.
Thank you, Dan. One of the questions that came in is, we talk a lot about how all these very large, exaggerated conglomerations of money, end up playing out in a race for legislative seat or the governor's race. But how does this trickle down? How does it affect the down ballot, nonpartisan type races? Everything from school board to your local utility board, your city council. How is that affected? Because I think we might have broken some records here in Eugene and 4 years ago when we had someone spend over $50,000 for a city council race. So how does it affect those down ballot positions?
Well, I would say that, and of course every election is different, every locale is different, right? So, but I think that you are seeing the influence of money into spheres of elections that we haven't seen before. A lot of it is because of the tremendous divide that we have politically. I mean, for example, we've seen it here in Oregon. Schools and school boards talking about what's acceptable for displays in schools or books or anything else, and they're actually getting a particular political philosophy and money to recall school board members and to try and do that. And you see that, you saw it here with Representative Holvey, who, by the way, is one of the few people that I actually served with that is still in the legislature. And Paul announced, by the way, yesterday that he is going to retire after this session. But, and you saw that recall election and a lot of money that went into that. So you're starting to see it in judgeships, and I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing more of that here in Oregon. But if you follow national politics and you see what's happened in the last few years in battleground states like Michigan and Minnesota and Wisconsin, where the Supreme Court was the issue, we need to have a Supreme Court on, quote, our side. And so judges, which are supposed to just interpret the law, not have, create the law, obviously we have seen that those political philosophies end up in decision-making processes. So you're seeing a lot more money in areas that we never really saw before. And I think we're going to continue to see that, which makes reforming campaign finance even more important because it is kind of metastasizing throughout different parts of our government system. That's my thought. Dan?
Yes, the Petition 9 limits do apply to judges and local governments. Local governments can adopt lower limits and more stringent disclosure and tagline requirements if they want to, and Multnomah County and Portland have already done that. The bill at the legislature also applies to judges and local governments, but does so with the much higher limits and with the loopholes that I described. So pretty much not limited on the local or state level.
Joel Corin, City Club member. My assumption is that the petition is written in a neutral fashion, that it applies to Democrats and Republicans the same way. Is the politicians' fear of the other side getting an advantage paranoia, or is there something else going on?
Well, I think if you're in the political realm, you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to think that maybe there is one. I mean, that's just kind of how people in politics think. Somebody trying to gain an advantage, and I have no evidence of that, but I'm always fearful of that. and I mean kind of tongue in cheek, but not but truthfully, in the political realm, you're always wondering what's going on behind some stage door that is contrary to what you're trying to do. So it does help fuel this whole financial investment in politics, just making sure that I have the tools available. I mean, if you look at some of the size of various campaign accounts, I mean, you have people who are virtual locks. Okay, if you're a Democrat in Portland or downtown Eugene and you're an incumbent, you're not going to have a race, right? I mean, I don't know exactly the numbers in Eugene, but if you're Portland, there's 6 Democrats for every 2 Republicans, right? So most people don't even run. Just like in Eastern Oregon, if you're a Democrat and you're running in LeGrand, well, good luck. You're going to be outnumbered 7-1. So, and yet, even though there's no races, there's no way you're going to really lose to that other political persuasion in that particular locale. Look at some of the money they accumulate. Well, why are people giving them so much money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you don't even really have a race? Well, that gets to the point is you're expected to be collectors of money so that you can then kind of launder that through your campaign and give it to another campaign. That's been what's happened.
Thank you.
Well, I like Rick's term, the political industrial complex. Political consultants like being paid, and limiting money in politics means that there's less business for political consultants on all sides. So all the consultants advise their candidates, oh, we don't want this limit on campaign contributions. It's in their personal self-interest to have no limits.
This is a perfect segue into the next question, which is, does the ballot measure say anything about the transfer of accumulated campaign monies from one account to the next? When Val Hoyle went from being a state elected official to federal, and Rick will have to help me with this, I don't believe you can spend campaign funds that you were given for a state race. I don't think you can spend it on federal. So what happened to that money? What's going to happen to Holvey's money when he doesn't run?
Well, Dan wrote the measure, so let's let him answer that.
Under existing law, I don't know about whether a federal campaign can accept anything that was raised by a state campaign. I don't think so. But under existing law, any money left in Paul Holvey's account, he can basically do whatever he wants with, pretty much. You can contribute it to other candidates. You can contribute it to any 501c organization, which includes, nonprofits, also includes unions, also includes trade associations. You could give the money to the Chamber of Commerce.
Or the City Club of Eugene.
Right, you could do that. Under our measure, what happens is that the divestiture of excess funds at the end of the campaign has to come right at the end, right when the election is over, basically in the 60 days after that, so that the candidate, if he or she runs again, doesn't have a war chest that gives her a big advantage. And we basically allow the money to be spent on mostly the same purposes, except if you give it to a nonprofit, it has to be a 501c3, and you can't give it to some other candidate.
Thank you.
Hi, John Belcher, City Club of Eugene member. Neither of you spoke at all to the amount of out-of-state money in campaigns. I wonder if, A, you have any information about how much is being spent from out of state in general, and B, how do either of these measures speak to that?
Okay, I'll take that first part of that anyway, when you talk about independent expenditures, that's very hard in terms of, where out-of-state money is coming. In terms of out-of-state money that goes to candidates or committees, that is reported on ORSTAR. So you can get on the Secretary of State's website, ORSTAR, and they highlight them. I think it's in red if it's, from an out-of-state contributor. Frankly, a lot of people just don't actually look at that stuff other than other political consultants and candidates, mining where there might be some money that they want. But that's reported. But in terms of independent expenditures, just like within the state of Oregon, that gets more difficult, which is what Dan and his crew are trying to at least provide some more transparency on. Dan?
Right. The bill in the legislature doesn't differentiate between in-state money and out-of-state money. IP9 does. IP9 limits small donor committees and membership organizations to receiving money from individuals who live, work, or go to school in Oregon. Whether that will survive the current iteration of the U.S. Supreme Court is kind of up in the air. There have been federal court cases that say that you can't discriminate against out-of-state people or entities, but you can certainly discriminate against foreign corporations and entities. And IP9 bans all contributions and spending by foreign corporations and entities in both candidate races and ballot measure races. The bill in the legislature doesn't do anything about that. That leaves it legal in Oregon for foreign corporations and entities to spend all they want on ballot measures, and to they could under the bill in the legislature fund membership organizations which could then make contributions to candidates. So, yeah, that's it.
Thank you. One quick question. Can you explain just briefly the term small member organization or small donor organization? There's a little confusion about that.
Right. Small donor committee in IP9 is anyone can form one, but the only money that it can take in is from individuals in amounts of $250 or less per year, and as I indicated, it has to be individuals who live, work, or go to school in Oregon. The small donor committee in the bill of the legislature is somewhat different, but it's pretty much the same, although I don't believe that they required that the funds come from Oregonians. There are, no other state has the concept of small donor committees except Colorado. They've had them for about 10 years, and we sort of modeled ours on the Colorado concept.
Thank you, Dan.
I'm Martha Ravitz, longtime City Club member. I have two questions, really. One is, I was interested to hear you say that the unions and the corporations were allied in promoting the bill in the legislature. As a former public servant at the university, I was surprised about that alliance. And the other question I have is, I was approached yesterday about signing IP9, and I said I wanted to wait and hear this forum first. So if we're interested in signing the measure, where can we do that?
Go ahead, Dan. I think it's on his website, actually.
Sure. Well, both the big unions and the big corporations, they like the system with no limits. They want to be able to give as much as they want to candidates, and of course, that I think indentures the candidates to them. And certainly any candidate in Oregon, any office holder in Oregon now knows that any union and any corporation can dump $10 million in their opponent's campaign at will. And so you've got to consider that when you're making decisions as a public official. If you want to sign the measure, you can go to the Honest Elections Oregon website, and you can also give me your phone number, and I will send somebody to your house.
Yeah, the old-fashioned way. I like it. Shoe leather.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Paul Thompson, a longtime City Club member, and thank you very much for joining us today. It's been very helpful. You're obviously experts in this field and so on, so I would like to have you give us your views on public financing of elections.
Okay, I'll start on that one. By the way, experts, I was reminded one time, X is a has-been and spurt is a drip under pressure. That's the political world. And I differ with a lot of folks. I have nothing against public elections. People want to do that. I'm not a fan personally of public finance elections. I like giving money to someone or a cause that I believe in. I don't want to fund anonymously someone or something through my tax dollars or to somebody that I would not support. That's just my personal view, on that. And then the other part of that is that, you can have publicly supported, elections to try and minimize this. But as we have both pointed out, you can't stop independent expenditures. So you and I could run for city council. We agreed just to limit us to $50,000 that the city of Eugene is going to give us. But anybody in this room could run television ads for $200,000 against one or the other of us on their own because they prefer someone else. So that's the problem with that. But I have no, if any municipality and the citizens want to have publicly sponsored elections, that's fine with me. I'm just a little bit more, I'd rather just give my $100 to a particular person or cause that I really believe in. That's just me, though. Dan?
Yes, IP9 does not have public funding. The bill at the legislature also does not have it. As I mentioned, the bill in the legislature as written abolishes the Portland program for public funding, which was adopted by the Portland City Council about 4 years ago. I think that the next version of the bill will take out that prohibition. Public funding is, as far as an initiative goes, is a really big stretch. Because while limits on contributions and disclosure requirements and tagline requirements are very popular with voters, public funding or government funding to candidates is not very popular with voters. So our measure doesn't have it.
Thank you. There's some question. I was quite shocked to hear that in-kind contributions section of the amendment to the bill in the legislature. Right now, it's my understanding when you run for office, which I've done a couple times, when you get an in-kind contribution, you treat the same as money. So how do you determine the value of a, quote, in-kind contribution?
Well, that's it.
Go ahead, Dan. Go ahead.
Well, that's, of course, a problem in every system, and there are accepted ways of doing that. In the bill at the legislature, a membership organization, for example, can provide 6 full-time years of professional services to every statewide candidate and 3 full-time years of professional service to every non-statewide candidate in the election year. So those are quantified in terms of, FTEs, and so it doesn't matter how much it's worth. They can provide that level of professional services as measured sort of by the hour and not by the money. Our measure allows the non-professional services about 20,000 in non-professional services. So that requires a quantification of what the services are worth. But that's required by the federal government and by every state. We have to quantify in kinds. If you buy a banner and give it to your candidate, you've got to report the cost of the banner. Yeah. If you do volunteer work is not considered a contribution at all, either in existing law or in our measure or their measure. So totally unlimited volunteer work, as long as you're not paid for it, is fine. But if, for example, you're doing volunteer work and you're paid for it by your employer, then that's an in-kind contribution by your employer. And so the quantification would be, how many hours did you spend on it, and basically what's your hourly pay. So in-kinds do have to be quantified, but under the bill at the legislature, you just count up the hours, you don't count up the money.
Okay, thank you. We're running out of time, so I'd like to give each of you about 30 seconds. If there's anything you want to leave, any parting remarks you want to leave us with.
Dan, go ahead. Why don't you kick off first 30?
Well, I'd like to answer a question from Rick Metzger about whether Phil Knight or the Democratic Governors Association or SEIU could do the same thing that they did in the last election under the bill at the legislature, and the answer is yes. They gave millions of dollars to their candidates for governor. They could do the same under the bill at the legislature, mainly by creating and funding multiple membership organizations, and then using the contribution limits that I went over in my presentation. So it would require somewhat more paperwork. That's true. It probably would require registering some anonymous LLCs in Wyoming or New Mexico or Nevada, but that's easy to do. But yes, very large contributions could still be made under the bill at the legislature.
Thank you.
Yeah, so anyway, thanks for the opportunity to be here today. This is an issue that, as you know, has been percolating for a long, long time. It will probably never totally end, but it's why it is really important that rather than just give up, you try to do the best thing possible to maintain the integrity of the election system. So I really have a lot of respect for Dan and those folks who try to make sure that in Oregon that we have the best system possible in an imperfect judicial world when it comes to campaign finance, but doing the best job possible. And I look forward to the opportunity to hear the debate this fall on that. And I would just encourage everyone to look at the details of both measures if they do come to the ballot together to see whether they accomplish what you think they are actually accomplishing. And again, thank you for having me here, Sandra.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. Thank you.
This has been our March 1st conversation at the City Club of Eugene. A few thanks this week. Thanks to the Terrell Group, which hosted the Industry for Educators class last week. Next week, the class will visit Palo Alto Software to learn some of the opportunities available for work in that field. This upcoming week provides many opportunities to get involved in our community. The annual food drive for the Northeast Neighborhood Association is at the Harvest Community Church tomorrow, March 2nd. The Sustainability Commission will discuss food waste prevention at their committee meeting on March 4th. The Human Rights Commission will meet to discuss homelessness and poverty on the 4th and the 5th. And the Intergovernmental Relations Committee will meet to discuss city legislative policies on March 6th. And then, of course, last but not least, we are back next Friday, the 8th, to talk about the All-In program and how it is working with the goal of ending homelessness in Lane County. That program will be at Carlita's Restaurant at the top of the Gordon Hotel. So I look forward to seeing you all there. Until then, peace.